Okay, China and Russia have united their stance against the United States over maintaining sanctions on North Korea.
The lack of trust between Washington and Pyongyang hinders the development of joint measures which the parties could take at the same time and sequentially to move the process of resolving outstanding differences forward. We should think about a system of international guarantees which could play a decisive role in resolving the problem of the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula.
To North Korea.
There is a provision in the Security Council resolutions that the Council is prepared to modify the sanction measures in the light of the DPRK's compliance. Now, given the positive developments in the inter-Korean and the DPRK-US relations and the DPRK's important pledges and actions on denuclearization, China believes that the Security Council needs to consider invoking in due course this provision to encourage the DPRK and other relevant parties to move denuclearization further ahead.
Annual cap on refined petroleum imports to North Korea.
On the sidelines of the annual UN gathering, Beijing said the Security Council should reward Pyongyang for the positive developments on denuclearization by easing sanctions. The Russian foreign minister said steps taken by North Korea towards gradual disarmament should be followed by the easing of sanctions. Sergei Lavrov said it is unacceptable for sanctions to become an instrument of collective punishment. The remarks were made after the U.S. told members of the Council to maintain maximum pressure against North Korea.
We must not forget what's brought us this far, the historic international pressure campaign that this Council has made possible through the sanctions that it imposed. Until the final denuclearization of the DPRK is achieved and fully verified, it is our solemn collective responsibility to fully implement all UN Security Council resolutions pertaining to North Korea.
U.S. President Donald Trump met with the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in June in the first meeting between the two leaders. North Korea signed an agreement on denuclearization in return for removing sanctions and security guarantees. Jason Unruhe is a political commentator who joins us. Jason Unruhe, you have the U.S. as usual. This kind of reminds us of what North Korea said at one point, that they are gangster-like in terms of the demands that they are making on North Korea. How do you read the developments so far and the most recent overtures towards this denuclearization, which even the U.S. admits is going to take perhaps even years?
Oh, it's certainly going to take quite a while, given the way that the United States has behaved and the general mistrust that exists between the two countries. Now, the DPRK has only created these nuclear weapons in order to serve as a deterrent against invasion by the United States. There's no reason why the DPRK in general would trust the United States, given the fact that it has essentially for over a century has invaded countries, stolen land, broken promises, and all manner of unethical dealings. The DPRK is wise to be wary of what the United States says. Now, essentially this comes down to the United States does not want the nuclear deterrent on the Korean Peninsula. And as a result, they are willing to make some concessions in order to try to get rid of it. As the clip there played, they act as though the sanctions are what brought this peace negotiation to the table. Well, this is certainly not true. It's quite the opposite, in fact. The nuclear weapons is what has created this new situation that the United States is so upset about in general. Kim Jong-un has reached out to the South outside of the control of the United States and initiated peace overtures because something they feel more confident in doing and now that they have such a great deterrent against invasion. Now, the United States is certainly very wary of the DPRK because the two are absolute enemies. And I think a lot of people do want to see the denuclearization of the DPRK. However, given the reality of the imperialist world we face, the DPRK is certainly right to suspect that they are going to be invaded or possibly even destroyed. The United States says that they will release the sanctions once the DPRK gets rid of their nuclear program. However, it's kind of a one-way street on this one. If the DPRK demolishes its testing grounds, its nuclear capabilities, it would take a significant amount of time to build them up again if the U.S. does not live up to their word. And all the U.S. has to do is simply impose sanctions again by the stroke of a pen. So the U.S. can turn their back on their word on an instant, and the DPRK would be left hanging in the wind for having lived up to their agreement. I mean, the same thing with the JCPOA agreement. There was an agreement there between all the countries and Iran. Sorry?
Yes, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we're just fresh out of time. Jason Unruhe, political commentator.